Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into what feels like a gripping political thriller about a president thrust into a totally unprecedented national crisis. We're going to explore the life, the incredibly difficult choices, and the lasting legacy of Millard Fillmore, the 13th President of the United States.
So who exactly was the accidental president? Seriously, just imagine this scenario for a second. The United States is literally tearing itself apart over the expansion of slavery. The nation is teetering right on the absolute brink of civil war, and suddenly, the president dies. What on earth happens next? The immense, crushing burden of leading a fractured country drops instantly onto the shoulders of a man who never expected or asked for it. That man was Millard Fillmore.
Okay, let's jump right into it with Part 1, From Poverty to Power. To truly understand the leader, we have to look at where he came from, and his beginnings could not have been more stark. Fillmore's life was an intense, true rags-to-riches journey. Born in a freezing log cabin in upstate New York back in 1800, he grew up in just grinding poverty with very little formal schooling. But his intellectual curiosity, it was absolutely relentless. He voraciously read whatever books his mother could get her hands on. By 1819, he manages to secure an apprenticeship with a local judge, relying entirely on self-study to master the law. Just 4 years later, in 1823, he was admitted to the New York State Bar. And a crucial part of this journey was his marriage to Abigail Powers. She was an incredibly intelligent, well-read teacher who became his true intellectual partner, constantly advising him on policy and strategy as he stepped into the public arena.
Now, you might be wondering, what did Fillmore actually stand for? Well, he aligned his career with the Whig Party. They were all about economic modernization, internal improvements, think canals and railroads, and protective tariffs to help American industries compete globally. Fillmore entered politics as a reformer focused on these very practical, stabilizing measures. He really hated the idea of extremes. He believed the government's job was to build up the nation. And this deeply ingrained instinct for always finding the middle ground, well, as you'll see, that would later become his ultimate undoing.
All right, moving on to Part 2, The Accidental President. Let's set the scene. We jump ahead to 1848. The Whig Party desperately needs a presidential ticket that won't completely tear their fragile national coalition apart. So, to balance the ticket, they nominate General Zachary Taylor, a Southern slaveholder, for president, and they choose our moderate Northerner, Millard Fillmore, for vice president. And then, this happens. July 9, 1850. President Zachary Taylor suddenly dies after just over a year in office. Now, the nation was already locked in a massive, heated debate over whether new territories acquired from the Mexican-American War would allow slavery. Taylor's sudden death threw an already deeply divided, hyper-anxious nation completely off balance.
History basically pivoted in a single day. You see, President Taylor had actually taken a hardline, anti-compromise stance. He wanted to admit California as a free state immediately with absolutely zero concessions to the South. But Fillmore, he was the exact opposite. He was a pragmatist who firmly believed compromise was the literally only way to save the Union from an immediate civil war. The very second he took the oath of office, Fillmore decisively replaced Taylor's entire cabinet with pro-compromise figures, including the legendary Daniel Webster as Secretary of State. The accidental president was now at the wheel, desperately trying to steer the country away from the cliff.
Now for Part 3, The Compromise of 1850.
This is the ultimate legislative crucible that would completely define Fillmore's legacy and severely test his profound belief that the Union had to be preserved at absolutely all costs. Here are the 5 complex measures that made up the Compromise of 1850. First up, California comes in as a free state. Second and third, the territories of New Mexico and Utah are organized by popular sovereignty, meaning the local settlers would just vote on the slavery issue themselves. Fourth, the slave trade, though not slavery itself, is abolished in Washington, D.C. And fifth, the enactment of a very strict Fugitive Slave Act. These bills were a desperate, agonizing attempt to somehow appease both Northern abolitionists and Southern pro-slavery advocates.
But the crucial flashpoint here was the Fugitive Slave Act. It required escaped slaves to be returned to their owners, and incredibly, it legally compelled free state citizens and federal marshals to actively assist in their capture. Refusal meant heavy fines or even prison time. Now, Fillmore personally hated the institution of slavery, but experiencing immense cognitive dissonance, he signed and enforced this brutal law anyway. Why? Because he believed it was his strict constitutional duty and the only possible way to keep Southern states from seceding. He even sent federal troops into northern cities, like Boston, to enforce it against intense abolitionist resistance.
Let's shift gears to Part 4, Opening the World. While his own country was quite literally fracturing inward, Fillmore was desperately trying to look outward, attempting to expand American trade and modernize its foreign policy. And this brilliantly illustrates his pragmatic approach to the world. In 1852, he dispatched Commodore Matthew Perry to Japan, a nation that had been completely isolated from Western trade for centuries. This bold move eventually led to the 1854 Treaty of Kanagawa, opening Japan up to the world, a massive geopolitical shift that laid the groundwork for modern international relations in Asia. Meanwhile, closer to home, in 1851, Fillmore actively suppressed rogue American filibusters who were illegally trying to provoke a war with Spain to annex Cuba. He wanted new markets and trade absolutely, but he cautiously avoided reckless military conflicts that could further destabilize his already fragile nation.
But back home, things were coming apart at the seams. His attempts to appease everyone completely destroyed his political base. Northern Whigs were absolutely outraged by his enforcement of the Fugitive Slave Act, viewing it as a total moral abomination and a betrayal of their core values. At the exact same time, Southern Whigs felt his compromises didn't go far enough. They were demanding even stronger federal protections for slavery. By trying to stand perfectly in the middle, Fillmore basically alienated everyone. His actions violently fractured his coalition, leading directly to the total collapse of the Whig Party.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, A Complex Legacy.
With the Whig Party completely shattered into pieces, Fillmore was left entirely without a political home. This forced a former president to seek relevance in a rapidly polarizing, incredibly volatile environment. The result? Third place. That is exactly where Fillmore finished in the 1856 presidential election. Desperate to hold the Union together, he controversially accepted the nomination of the nativist, anti-immigrant, Know-Nothing Party. Now, he didn't actively embrace their extreme views, but he thought he could use their platform to unify the country and stop the rise of purely sectional parties. He couldn't. Finishing a distant third proved once and for all that the moderate middle ground he so fiercely championed had completely vanished. The nation was polarized beyond repair.
Ultimately, his desperate efforts to preserve the Union through compromise completely failed to prevent the Civil War. Fillmore retired to Buffalo, New York, where he spent his final years as a highly respected civic leader. He actually did incredible work there, like helping found the University at Buffalo and championing local charities. But his national legacy? It's profoundly tragic. He was a man who sacrificed his own political career, and arguably his moral standing regarding the Fugitive Slave Act, all for a compromise that only delayed the bloodshed rather than actually preventing it.
So I'll leave you with this provocative question to chew on. Was Millard Fillmore a pragmatic savior who bought the Union a crucial decade to prepare for a war it just wasn't ready for yet? Or was he a failed compromiser who surrendered his morals for an unsustainable peace? The immense burden of accidental leadership often forces leaders right into these impossible gray areas of history. Think about what you would have done in his shoes. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring the fascinating complexities of our past.